For the past couple of months, we've been looking at the theme of the people of God throughout the Bible. There's a number of ideas that we've focused on, and we're coming to a book now that will help us to really grasp all of the ideas and to think through all of them. That's the book of Daniel. Last week, we started looking at the theme of the mark of the beast and how it ties in with the people of God. And to understand that idea, the mark of the beast, we have to stop in Daniel for a little while to begin to identify some more of the tendencies of what a beast is. So eventually, we'll get to the book of Revelation where it talks about the mark of the beast. And we'll see that has nothing to do with the coronavirus vaccine being the mark of the beast. It's not about that. We'll discover what it's really about. But right now, we're going to spend a few weeks in Daniel and see this story of what it looks like to live as the people of God when we live in a country that is not the people of God. In the book of Daniel, we are reading the story of what it looks like when human beings choose to define themselves through belonging to Yahweh, through belonging to God, instead of choosing to define themselves through the nation they live in. When we talk about the people of God, we're talking about a lot of themes. We've seen that the Hebrew and Greek words for people and nation also include the idea of ethnicity and nationality and belonging to a family. So we all have a tendency to define ourselves by belonging to groups, to our country or to our family, to our ethnic group. But we're called to define ourselves by belonging to God, belonging to his people. And that's a people in the New Testament that involves all kinds of nations, all kinds of ethnic groups. God's hope is that all human beings would be called to him and welcomed into his new people that's made up of people from all different backgrounds. And we'll see even that idea is present in the book of Daniel. Daniel takes place in the nation of Babylon. The people of Israel have been captured by the Babylonians. At this point, just the leaders have been brought into Babylonia. And so there's a tension here between those who belong to Israel, which is the people of God in the Old Testament, and those who belong to the empire of Babylon. When we read this story, we also need to keep in mind things all the way back from the book of Genesis. In Genesis 11, we read the story of the Tower of Babel. In the Tower of Babel story in Genesis 11, human beings wanted to build a name for themselves. And so they came together as a group, and there's this corporate, structural, systemic sin of wanting to make their name great, not wanting to fulfill their role as God's image bearers, as God's agents of change in the world, as the ones who bring shalom to the earth. And instead, they choose to build a name for themselves with their technology, with their arrogance, and God scatters them. So Babylon is Babel. Babylon is not only literal, the nation of Babylon, but a symbol of what it looks like when humanity does things in a way to build itself up instead of trying to serve God's commission to bring shalom to the whole world. That's the setting for the book of Daniel. So Daniel and the other main characters, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are Israelites. They belong to the people of God in the Old Testament, the ethnic people of God. But they are present, they're living in exile in Babylon. And we today are part of the people of God because we belong to Jesus. And like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we live in exile. We live in a land that is not our own. No matter what country in the world we live in, no matter if you live in the country where you were born or you immigrated somewhere, no matter if you have citizenship in the place you live or if you don't, we all are foreigners. We read this in 1 Peter 2. We all live as foreigners and exiles. So we have a lot to learn from the story of Daniel. The book of Daniel presents us with what it looks like when people and individuals choose to live as human beings the way that God intended us, instead of just fitting into our culture and our country. And we'll see that today as we begin to read through the book of Daniel, starting in chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. We've seen that in the Old Testament, a God goes with a people and a people goes with a God. So anytime one country took over another, they would not only believe that the military of this country was stronger than the military of the other, they would believe that the God of this country was stronger than the God of the other. So The people of Babylon would believe that their god Marduk and all the other gods and goddesses they believed in were stronger than the God of Israel, Yahweh. So they take all of the elements from Yahweh's temple and place them in the temple of Marduk. And when you read Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you see that Yahweh is willing to let his name and his reputation be tarnished because he wants his people to be disciplined. He wants them to be brought back into line with what he intends for them. The people of God were supposed to live in the way of Abraham. God called Abraham to bless all the nations, and then he gives the law, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, so that the people of Israel would be a blessing to all the nations. They carry his name. They're meant to represent him in the world, and they aren't doing it consistently. And so he said, if you don't do this consistently, then you will be exiled. So they are exiled. And at this point in the history of Israel, just the leaders of Israel have been exiled. Eventually, the whole nation's exiled, but the story of Daniel takes place when just the leaders have been exiled. Verse 3, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. So the best and brightest of Israel, those who belong to the people of God, will be brought in and taught the Babylonian way of life. So these are people who should be defined through Genesis 12. They belong to the family of Abraham. They are called to be God's conduit of blessing to all nations. They are called to bless everyone because God has blessed them. But the king of the Babylonians and his chief, Ashpenaz, want these Israelites, who are defined through Genesis 12, to instead become Babylonians, or Genesis 11 people of the Tower of Babel. So there's a tension here between being the people of God or being a person of Babylon. We have the same tension in our lives. Do we define ourselves through our belonging to the people of God or through our belonging to the nation we live in and the way of the world? So they're invited to be trained in the way of the world and the way of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that to enter the king's service. So they're going to be taught Babylonian ways of thought, and they're going to be fed Babylonian food. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. For some reason, we call Daniel by his Hebrew name and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by their Babylonian names. What we'll see through the book of Daniel is that Daniel shows us what it looks like when an individual chooses to follow God's way instead of following Babylon's way. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego show us what it looks like when a group chooses to follow God's way instead of choosing to follow Babylon's way. Those are both really important ideas. We've been talking about corporate and systemic sin. We've been talking about our corporate identity as the people of God. And we need to realize that the Bible calls us to think of ourselves as individually loyal to God, but also as corporately loyal to God. And both are really important, and the book of Daniel shows us that both are really important. Verse 8, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So the big difference between Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and all the other young men from the other nations is what they ate. At the end, these Jewish men are found to be better than everyone else. They're better at all of the tasks that Nebuchadnezzar wants them to do. They're better at these supernatural, mystical things, and they're better at the normal, human, natural things as well. They're healthier, they're stronger, they're smarter, they're wiser. Why is that? Why are these people more complete humans than everyone else? Babylon wants to develop the best and brightest. Babylon wants to create intelligent, well-rounded human beings. But somehow, Daniel and the others become better humans than what Babylon could produce. And the only difference that we see is what they ate. So there are all kinds of different ideas that have come from this story. People have said all Christians should be vegetarians or vegans. The Daniel plan was a popular diet a few years ago. But is that really what's going on here? When you look at verse 12, Daniel says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink." Is it that we're supposed to eat bland food and be not able to experiment with good flavors? What's going on? Well, the word that's translated vegetables is only found here in the entire Bible, and it's the word zeroim. The word zera is the word for seed, and it's very common throughout the whole Old Testament, but this word only occurs here. So what Daniel's asking for is seeds. Zeroim is just the plural form of the word seeds. He says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but seeds to eat and water to drink." Why is Daniel asking for seeds? What's the deal with that? When you go back to Genesis 1, you find out something interesting about seeds. On day 3 of creation, God creates the land, and then he causes plants to grow out of it, and it highlights 2 kinds of plants, seed-bearing plants and fruit-bearing plants, which have seeds in the fruit. And then on day 6, God creates land animals or beasts, and he creates humans. Last week we saw that humans are created to rule over the beasts, to rule over the living things. And then in Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve eat from the fruit, which has seeds in it, when Adam and Eve eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they're tempted by a snake, who is a beast. So they are supposed to rule over the beast, but instead they listen to the beast and take the one kind of fruit they're not supposed to take. And they choose to experience and define what is good and evil for themselves instead of trusting in God's ability to define that for them. They want to have that knowledge for themselves. And then in the next story, in Genesis 4, Cain ends up killing his brother. But before he does that, God says, "Be careful, sin is crouching at your door like a beast. You must rule over it." So Cain ends up not ruling over the beast of sin. He gives into it, just like Adam and Eve didn't rule over the beast, the serpent, and they gave in as well. So in Genesis, this idea of a beast is a multifaceted idea. A beast is an actual animal human beings are supposed to have dominion over. We're supposed to rule over, give them shalom, but also keep them in line. And sin is represented by a beast. Sin is this animal tendency we all have to define what's best for ourselves. So Genesis 1 establishes a special way of relating to the beasts, including what they eat and what we eat. So in Genesis 1, God creates the animals, the living creatures, the beasts. Then he creates humanity, male and female. And then God tells them to rule over all of the animals, the beasts. In verse 29, then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. So in Genesis 1, God gives seed plants to humans for their food, and other plants to the beasts for their food. What's kind of interesting is that it actually says in Hebrew, "I give you every seeding seed plant and every fruit that seeds seeds." There's a very big emphasis on the fact that these plants give seeds. The humans were designed to eat seeds. So in a Genesis 1 way of life, in a Genesis 1 ordering of the universe. God creates spiritual beings to bring shalom to the heavens. God creates human beings to bring shalom to the earth. And part of that means ruling over the beasts. To be a true human means to trust in God for his definition of what peace looks like, what wholeness looks like, what harmony looks like, and to have dominion, to bring creativity and beauty and order to the world God has made. And part of that order in Genesis 1 is that humans ate seeds. I don't know if eating the seeds only is literal or symbolic, but in any case, in Daniel and his friends choose to eat seeds to identify themselves as being Genesis 1 people. They want to define their lives as being Shalom-Bringers to God's creation. They're not going to be defined by Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, even though they live in the city of Babel. They are going to be Genesis 1 people who are Shalom-Bringers, who rule over the beasts, who don't live in a beastly way, but live in God's way. And as being Genesis 1 people in the world, that makes them Genesis 12 people, people who fulfill the call of Abram to bless all the nations or all the ethnicities. So let's see what this looks like as they begin to follow God in the city of Babylon. Daniel 2. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream and we will interpret it. The king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have to cut you into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dream and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. A few really interesting things speak to me from this passage that tie in with Genesis. So in Genesis 3, the snake was called a wise or crafty beast. And the snake tempts Adam and Eve with the knowledge that the spiritual beings have, the knowledge that the gods have. Here in this story, the astrologers of Babylon say only the gods could know, only the spiritual beings could possibly know what your dream is and what it's about, O king. But Daniel has wisdom, like the serpent had wisdom in Genesis 3, and he uses his wisdom to speak to Arioch. So Daniel actually is a little bit like the snake and a little bit like the spiritual beings, but he's not trying to grasp these things. He's not trying to steal things for himself like Eve and Adam took the fruit. They took it for themselves. Daniel is not living as a Genesis 11 person, as the person of the Tower of Babel. Daniel is not living as a Genesis 3 person, a person who follows the way of the snake. Daniel is living as a Genesis 1 person and a Genesis 12 person. Daniel is bringing blessings to the nation where he lives because he is living as a true human being and allowing the image of God to show in him. So let's see what he does. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So these four men who are walking in the way that humans were meant to walk and who are faithful Israelites, who are faithful people of God, they come at this differently. Instead of trying to take the knowledge of the heavens to save their skin, they come with humility to the Creator and ask for wisdom. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you, and you have made known to us the dream of the king." Daniel says, the knowledge of what's going on in the spiritual realm isn't something that we are to take like Adam and Eve took, but something that belongs to you, Creator God. And when we ask, you give us this wisdom, and we're so thankful. You're the one who changes times and seasons. Remember, in Genesis 1, the sun, moon, and stars were created to show the times and seasons. The spiritual beings were to show what the times and seasons were. But the Creator can change all of that. He's higher than even the gods. Yahweh is supreme, and I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. Verse 24, then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come. And the revealer of mysteries has showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind." Daniel's not about building his name in the way of Babel. He's about building the name of Yahweh. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. This is a statue of a human, or the image of a human. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on the threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your majesty, you are the king of kings. You're a powerful king. You're an emperor. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. Most Bible scholars think that this description of the four kingdoms is actually a description of four historical kingdoms. So Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the Babylonians, who ruled the whole region, what we would call the Middle East in modern Western terms. Next came the Persians and Medes, who ruled that same region. So Babylon is roughly where Baghdad is today, and the Persians are where Iran is today. And after the Persians and Medes ruled, then Alexander the Great conquered from Greece or Macedonia. He conquered all the way to India. And after Alexander died, there were four nations that came out of the Greek Empire, out of Alexander's empire very quickly. So those could potentially be the four things that Daniel's talking about, whether you count the Persians and Medes as the second and third, or you count the Persians and Medes as the second. There's different ways to get to four sections of the statue. In any case, this is the story of the rise of a sequence of empires, or kings of kings. The emperors are kings of kings, those who take over other nations. The point of this passage is that there are these powerful nations coming, and Nebuchadnezzar's the best or most powerful of all of them. But there's something that God's going to do that's different. In verse 44, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people, another that's the Hebrew word for people, nation, family, or ethnicity. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you are able to reveal this mystery." Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. By Daniel interpreting the dream, he showed that he was the best of men. He was the best of the humans, the best of the princes or rulers that lived in Babylon. And he showed that his God, Yahweh, was the best of gods, was higher than all the other gods. Just like the gods are higher than humans, Yahweh, his God, Daniel's God, is even higher than that compared to the gods. So by living as a true human being, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego build a name for Yahweh, but in doing so, their own name is also built up. Just like in Genesis 12, when God told Abraham, "I will give you a great name." By choosing to live as Genesis 1 people, as people who bring shalom to the world around them, and by choosing to live as Genesis 12 people who will bless all the nations, all the ethnicities, Daniel and his friends not only lift up the name of Yahweh, but also prove themselves to be the best humans, the truly human ones, the ones who look the way that God intended all humans to look. There's a lot that can be taken from this passage about history and how God is bringing a kingdom that will last forever, the people of God, how it's greater than any human nation, and those ideas all tie in with what we're talking about as well. But today I really want to highlight this idea that when we choose to build our lives, to define our lives through Genesis 1 and Genesis 12, we'll bring shalom, we'll bring blessing to everyone around us, then we look the way that God wanted us to look. If we don't try to build our lives on Genesis 3 and Genesis 11, where we're trying to build a name for ourselves individually and corporately, where we're trying to grasp for the knowledge of the spiritual realm, if we don't do that, but we instead choose to be those who are loyal to Yahweh and his commands to be Shalom-Bringers and those who bless the world, that's when we show what we are meant to be. That's when we live as our true selves, and that's also when we exalt the name of God. So I encourage you to be someone who is all about bringing shalom and blessing to everyone around you.